My name is Marcus David Webb. I'm 29 years old. I am a United States Marine Sergeant, Infantry, MOS 0311. And on March 7th, 2026, at 14:23 local time at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, I was clinically dead for 7 minutes and 40 seconds. What I need you to understand before anything else is this. I was not the kind of person this happens to. I was not a man who believed in visions, in divine messages, in anything that couldn't be confirmed by ground truth and verifiable intelligence. I had every reason in the world to be the last person standing in front of you telling this story, and yet here I am. Because he told me something. Not a feeling, not a symbol, not a metaphor. He told me when this war ends. Not how, not why. The exact day. I grew up in rural Tennessee, Baptist church every Sunday until I turned 17 and realized that nothing I'd ever prayed for had happened. Not a specific grief, just a slow accumulation of silence. You pray for things, the world continues exactly as it was, and eventually you stop expecting the phone to ring. I enlisted at 19. I wasn't angry at God. I just stopped believing there was anyone on the other end of the line. 3 deployments. The first 2 were what they were. Hard, dirty, occasionally terrifying, ultimately manageable. The third was Syria, 2023. I was leading a fire team on a reconnaissance patrol outside Deir ez-Zor when we took contact from a position we'd been told was cleared. 3 of my men didn't come home. Specialist Anton Reyes, PFC Damian Cole, Corporal Lee Tran. I say their names every night, not as prayer. I stopped praying in Syria. I say them the way you mark coordinates, so you don't forget where the loss happened. So you stay honest about what the earth has taken from you. After Syria, I stopped believing in almost everything. There was no dramatic conversion, just a quiet emptying out. The universe was not paying attention to individual human lives. I had the evidence. I believed in my daughter, Ellie, 6 years old. I have her name tattooed on the inside of my left forearm, Ellie, and I touch it without thinking, the way you touch a wall in the dark. I believed in the mission. Everything else was noise. The man who rode with me on my fire team in Qatar was Corporal Miguel Rodriguez, 24 years old, best fire partner I've ever had, quiet, fast, absolutely unflappable under pressure. Rodriguez is also deeply, openly, completely faithful. He prays before every mission, doesn't bow his head or close his eyes. He just goes still for about 30 seconds, lips moving slightly, and then he's back. Once I told him it was a waste of time. He looked at me and smiled, one of those small, knowing smiles that doesn't need words. And then he picked up his gear, and we moved out. We never argued about it. He never pushed. I never pushed back. That silence between us, that particular silence, matters to what I'm about to tell you. March 2026. Al Udeid Air Base, Qatar. The war had been running for 8 days. If you were watching the news in late February, you know what happened. The joint US-Israeli campaign against Iran's nuclear infrastructure launched on the 28th. Khamenei was killed in the first strike package. Hezbollah went active on Israel's northern border within hours. The Strait of Hormuz was partially disrupted, Iranian naval assets moving to restrict passage, and oil prices spiked in a way that sent markets into freefall. It was the first week of a war that nobody in power wanted to call a war, but everyone knew was won. On Al Udeid, we maintained routines. You eat at the same time, you do PT. You check your phone and immediately regret it because the news is constant and the news is terrible. Everyone on base knew someone on the strike packages. The phones were the worst part. That ceaseless stream of information nobody could do anything about, but nobody could stop reading. I was on perimeter security, far from combat operations. Qatar is support infrastructure, logistics and air support coordination. I was not supposed to be anywhere near direct threat. When Ellie asked on a video call if I was going somewhere scary, I told her the truth as I understood it. No, baby, it's just a job. She nodded the way 6-year-olds do when they don't believe you, but love you enough to pretend. On March 7th, Rodriguez and I were assigned to a routine logistics convoy. 2 vehicles, 6 personnel total. A supplies run to an outlying position, the kind of thing that happens 100 times a day on a base that size. Nothing flagged. No elevated threat indicators for the route. Rodriguez rode in my vehicle. I remember he went still for his 30 seconds before we mounted up. I didn't say anything. I just watched him, and then we moved out. The road was flat desert, midday heat, the kind that makes the horizon shimmer and turns distances into guesses. I was watching the road ahead when I heard a sound that every Marine knows before they understand it. A concussive shift in air pressure, a fraction of a second of wrongness before the world ends. The lead vehicle took the primary impact. An Iranian-manufactured drone, proxy-launched. We caught the secondary blast. I remember 3 things in sequence. The sound, a physical sound, something that hits your chest before it reaches your ears. Then light, total and white, consuming the windshield and everything beyond it. Then the tattoo on my forearm. I looked down at it in the half-second before consciousness left. Ellie, just her name. And then there was nothing. No pain, no transition. The world simply stopped. Rodriguez survived. I learned this later. He was thrown from the vehicle but intact enough to function. He reached my position and found no pulse, pupils fixed and dilated. He started CPR immediately, trained response, no hesitation, and called for medevac. The field report confirmed what Rodriguez experienced in real time. 7 minutes and 40 seconds of no cardiac activity, no pulse, no spontaneous respiration. By every clinical measure, I was gone. Here is what I experienced in those 7 minutes and 40 seconds. I was not in the desert. I was not in a tunnel or a field or anything with geometry I can map to the physical world. The best I can tell you is this. I was somewhere. That somewhere had no walls, no ceiling, no ground underfoot. And yet I was present in it, with a clarity I have never experienced while alive. My mind, trained over 3 deployments to immediately assess threat, to categorize environment, to identify position and orientation. My mind found nothing to assess. No threat, no mission, no weight, physical or operational. The absence of urgency was the most disorienting thing I have ever experienced. More than the blast, more than Syria, the total, complete absence of anything to be afraid of. I want to be precise about that. I was not afraid. And when I recall this now, that fact itself frightens me. Marcus Webb is always afraid of something. I have been afraid for 10 years and accepted it as the baseline condition of being alive. In that place, the baseline was gone. There was only presence. And something was moving toward me, or I toward it. The distinction was impossible to establish. And for the first time in my life, I didn't need to. I became aware of a presence before I perceived anything that could be called a figure or a form. The awareness washed over me like recognizing your childhood bedroom before the lights come on. Through the specific quality of the air, the particular silence, something that predates vision. I knew where I was before I knew anything else, and I understood who was there before anything was said. There is no visual description I can give you that I would stand behind as accurate. I use the word authority, not power, not size, not luminosity, though all of those were present. Authority, the specific quality of something that has never needed to prove itself. I knew who this was, not from anything I'd been taught. My theology was 30% retained Sunday school and 2 decades of deliberate neglect. I knew it with the same absolute certainty as my own name. Not thought, just fact, arriving complete. Every argument I had ever constructed dissolved, not because the arguments were defeated, but because I was past the place where arguments live. You don't argue with gravity when you're falling. I was just there, And he was there, and there was nothing between us. The first thing he said to me was not about the war. He named something from Syria, something I have never told anyone, not my CO, not my therapist, not Rodriguez. A specific thing I believed about myself in the darkest part of my conscience, something I had carried like a wound I wouldn't show anyone because showing it would make it real. He named it, precisely, without accusation. He named it with the quiet objectivity of a doctor delivering a diagnosis. Not to condemn, but to acknowledge what is actually there, so that it can finally be addressed. I broke. Standing in that place, wherever it was, the man who had not cried since the funeral of Corporal Lee Tran, the last of my three, finally gave way in front of this presence. Not from grief or from shame, though both were present. I broke because I had spent 10 years believing that being fully known meant being found wanting. And what I encountered instead was something I don't have adequate English for. Being fully known and fully accepted without any adjustment of the terms. No modification of what I was. No conditions on the other side. Just the weight of being completely seen, completely, and not destroyed by it. That was the moment my skepticism ended. The alternative, maintaining that this wasn't real, had suddenly become more irrational than accepting it. I am a man who follows evidence. The evidence was total. Then the conversation turned. He spoke about what was happening in the world I had come from. His tone carried no sorrow, no detachment, and none of the apocalyptic urgency that saturates every cable news feed. He spoke about the conflict the way someone speaks when they can see the beginning and the end of a thing simultaneously, viewing it as an event with a defined shape rather than a tragedy unfolding. A thing that begins and ends. And what he said to me, I received the way I receive grid coordinates, not as poetry, as information. The war that started on February 28th, the one that killed Khamenei and closed the strait and sent markets spiraling, is not the chaos it appears to be from inside it. It has a shape. It has a reason that isn't visible from ground level, and it has an end. He gave me the date, April 19th, 2026. That is the day. I received it the way I receive any piece of tactical intelligence, as a coordinate. There was no theatrical prophecy, no vision with symbols to interpret. It was pure information, delivered directly, with a precision my military mind processed before my spiritual mind caught up. April 19th, the war ends. But that's not the whole message. He told me more than the date. He told me why the date matters, and why the end matters more than the date itself. What comes after is a window, not peace in the permanent sense. He was not promising that the world becomes easy after April 19th. What he described was an opening. A specific period following the end of this conflict when something becomes possible that wasn't before. A readiness in people, a softening, a moment when questions that get buried under the noise of ordinary life rise to the surface because the noise has briefly stopped. A window for people to choose something different than what they've been choosing. He told me not to interpret the date, not to assign it to any political faction or theological framework, not to predict the sequence of events that leads to it. Deliver it, and only it, and let it land where it lands. My assignment is to carry the coordinate accurately and report it. What anyone does with it is between them and whatever they believe is on the other end of the line. He also told me that my survival, if it happened, was not accidental. And then I understood that I had a choice. It didn't come as a formal offer with time to consider. Instead, a sudden clarity arrived. I could stay in that place, where the absence of urgency and pain and weight was so complete that returning to the physical world felt like choosing to walk back into a burning building. Or I could go back. I did not want to go back. I want to be honest about that, because I think honesty is the only thing that makes any of this worth saying. It wasn't that I was happy there. Happiness is too small and too fragile a word for what that place was. It was that, what I had come from. The desert, the blast, the body on the ground, The 3 names I recite every night. The 10 years of silence I had carried as proof that God was absent. All of that felt from there like a dream. A painful dream I was being asked to re-enter. And then he showed me something. He bypassed visions of catastrophe or warnings about what would happen to Ellie if I didn't return. He simply showed me Ellie, my daughter, 6 years old, existing somewhere in the world, without me. The specific weight of her, not as grief, just as fact, just as the realest thing I knew. I turned back. I didn't negotiate. I didn't say anything. I just turned, and the movement was instantaneous. One moment in the light, the next, there was pressure, enormous pressure, and heat, and the unmistakable sensation of being crammed back into a body that hurt everywhere and was grateful for it. Rodriguez's hands on my chest, the sound of his voice low and rapid, counting compressions. The desert, blinding and white overhead, a ringing that filled my skull. And then a breath, my chest catching, involuntary, the way a drowning person breaks the surface. The first word I said was Ellie. I spent 6 days in the field hospital at Al Udeid. I was coherent. I answered questions correctly. I ate. I slept. The doctors described my survival as medically improbable, 7 minutes and 40 seconds of no cardiac activity with full cognitive recovery and no neurological deficit. They did not use the word miracle. But one of the nurses, who thought I was asleep on day 3, said it quietly to a colleague in the hallway, and I heard it, and I didn't correct her. I told Rodriguez on day 4. I left some things out. I couldn't find language for everything, and I still can't, but I told him enough. I told him something happened, and I saw something, and I cannot locate a rational framework for what I experienced. Rodriguez listened without interrupting. He has a gift for that, for receiving something without immediately needing to do anything about it. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I know. Not I believe you, or that's amazing, or I'm glad you made it. Just, I know." That moment, 2 words from a man who never once pushed me toward anything, changed something else in me that I'm still trying to name. That's the thing about Rodriguez. He'd been praying before every mission for years while I told him it was a waste of breath. He never argued. He never pushed. He just kept praying and kept that small smile, and never demanded that I arrive at what he already knew. That silence between us from the very beginning, that was him being right without needing to prove it. Things changed when I came back. Small things, real ones. I don't flinch from silence anymore. I used to fill it compulsively. Music, news, conversation, anything. Now silence is where I start. I no longer rehearse the arguments I spent a decade constructing. When I touch the Ellie tattoo on my forearm, I don't touch it the way I used to. Like a man touching something fragile in the dark, afraid it won't be there. I touch it as something given, something I was sent back to. And I carried the date. April 19th, 2026. For months I carried it without knowing what to do with it. I prayed about whether to speak, which was itself a change. I talked myself out of it twice. Convinced myself that silence was more honest than a testimony nobody asked for, from a man with no credentials. A Marine sergeant from Tennessee. No theological training, no ministry, no platform. But then the war started, February 28th. And the date Jesus gave me, April 19th, was real. Not yet reached, but present in my memory with a weight that became impossible to carry alone once the context for it had arrived. The war I had been told about was happening, exactly as I'd been told it would, and the date that ends it is coming. I'm not asking you to believe me. I want to say that clearly, because I spent 10 years not believing anyone else's testimony about God, and I am not going to be the man who demands that others accept his. I'm not a preacher. I'm not trying to build anything from this. I am a Marine who delivers accurate information to the people who need it. That's all I know how to be. What I can tell you is this: the date is real. The encounter was real. And if it's true that the war ends when he said it would, and I believe it is, then what he said about why it ends, about the window, about what becomes possible in the silence after, is also real. And that is the part I think people need to hear. Set aside the geopolitics, forget the military analysis, listen to the other part, the part about what comes after, the window. The moment when the noise stops and the questions rise and people have a chance to choose differently than they've been choosing. April 19th is not the end. He told me that plainly. It's the beginning of something. A door that opens when the fighting stops, if people are willing to walk through it. What you do with that is not my assignment. My assignment was to survive and to come back and to speak. I looked down at my forearm this morning. Ellie. She's 6 years old, and she thinks her dad is brave because he's a Marine. She doesn't know that the bravest thing I've ever done is stand in front of you right now and say what I saw, knowing exactly how it sounds. I came back for her. I'm speaking for everyone else. If this story found you at a moment when you've been asking questions you haven't been able to answer, that's not an accident. The window is coming. Whatever side of belief you're on right now, the same offer stands for you that stood for me when I had no interest in it whatsoever. You don't have to die to receive it. You just have to be willing to stop filling the silence long enough to hear what's already there. Subscribe. Stay with this channel. What comes after April 19th is going to matter more than the date itself, and we'll be here to walk through it together.